morning. Glad to have each of you here this morning for our fall edition of the Nashville Business Breakfast. It's always a pleasure to gather here at Allen Arena, and for those of you who are here for your first Nashville Business Breakfast, we welcome you, and we're glad you're with us. Personally, I have been looking forward to this breakfast ever since Randy Goodman committed to speaking to us. But I've known Randy for a few years, and as a freshman entering college here at Lipscomb a few years ago, there was this upperclassman that was just one of those people that for me personally is like, I want to grow up and be like him. I mean, he was a phenomenal drummer. Some of you may not remember this particular Saturday Night Live, but John Belushi did this amazing impersonation of the iconic British rocker Joe Cocker. Well, John Belushi's impersonation of Joe Cocker doesn't hold a candle to Randy Goodman's impersonation of Joe Cocker. I'm not sure you'll do that this morning, but no, we're thrilled to have Randy here this morning, and again, just someone that is a tremendous leader here in our business world here in Nashville, and I still want to be like you when I grow up, so thank you for being here. And it's always a pleasure and privilege for me to be able to welcome you, but also to welcome to the stage and introduce our partner in the Nashville Business Breakfast, the Nashville Business Journal, and on behalf of the Business Journal, our friend Kate Herman, the president and publisher. Would you please welcome Kate? I'm done.
Well, good morning. So nice to see you here this morning. And partnership is the operative word. Of course, business happens because we have relationships. And I'd like to introduce you to some other partners that we have of the program this morning. First off, Crow is a sponsor, and I'd like to introduce you to Marty Luter, who's office managing partner. Would you please welcome Marty?
Thank you, Kate. Crow Horwath is a top 10 audit, tax, and consulting firm. We have approximately 150 employees here in the Nashville area, and we're proud to be a sponsor of the Nashville Business Breakfast. Our partnership with the Nashville Business Journal and Lipscomb University has been great over the past several years, and everyone, please enjoy your breakfast and enjoy our speaker this morning. Thank you.
Thank you to Marty. And another long-time partner is PNC, and I'd like to introduce you to Eric Staten, Vice President and Tennessee Relationship Manager of Real Estate Banking. Please welcome Eric.
Good morning. Hopefully everyone's enjoying this beautiful morning here. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for breakfast at Lipscomb. Lipscomb is so gracious to continue to host the Nashville Business Breakfast Series and allow us to use this fantastic arena. So I'd also like to thank the Nashville Business Journal for having PNC Bank as a sponsor for the Breakfast Series again this year. We are so fortunate to have such proactive business partners like the MBJ in Lipscomb to bring together the greater Nashville business community. PNC Bank has been committed to the Nashville business community for over 10 years and fortunate enough to be part of this tremendous growth that we've all seen. We understand the key economic drivers needed to sustain Nashville's success, and we understand how to interpret those into our clients' financial discussions and strategic planning. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks.
And now we're going to give you a little time to visit at your tables, enjoy your breakfast, and we'll be back with you shortly to start the program. Thank you.
Once again, I want to welcome you this morning. We want to get started with our program. Continue to enjoy your breakfast, please, and again, so very glad you're with us. One thing I wanted to call your attention to, for those of you who have been to previous Nashville Business Breakfast, you know that there will be a Q&A session after Randy speaks to us, and you'll notice at the bottom of the front page of your program there are instructions for you to text questions in. Hopefully Kate and Turney can get to some of those questions, but if you have some questions that you'd like to send Randy's way, please feel free to follow the instructions on the program. Again, we're glad you're with us this morning. Looking forward to hearing from Randy. It's also always my privilege to introduce an individual to bring our invocation. And this morning, we're privileged to have the current president of the Student Government Association here at Lipscomb, a molecular biology pre-med major, who, much like my recollection of Randy years ago, I'm sure there are freshmen who have entered the university this year that look at Carson. I want to call him Parker because I know his dad, but look at Carson and say, I want to be like you. He is a tremendous leader for our student body. And in the context of a lot of the things that are going on in the world right now, particularly disaster relief, which you'll hear a little more about, he's just doing some great things in terms of leading the students in efforts in that regard. So would you please join me in welcoming Carson Panovic?
Will you pray with me? Father God, thank you for this new day. Thank you for this food, and thank you for the people that prepared it. Right now, we want to ask you to be with the victims of Hurricane Harvey. We pray that you will keep them safe, and you will continue to support them. We ask that you'll bless this day. Bless our conversations that we have. Help us to learn to be better stewards of the things that you have blessed us with. Help us to collaborate and be successful, not just for ourselves and our own businesses, but also for the benefit of our community. Teach us to reconcile our work with our faith, and convict us when our ways do not follow your ways. Give us greater measures of your wisdom and your spirit, and help us to be missionaries in our work every day. Thank you again for everything that you give us, and thank you for the blessing of this time. Help us to learn, but also to worship you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, good morning and welcome to this wonderful day in Nashville. Feeling of fall that's in the air, the joy of coming together early in the morning for breakfast, a wonderful speaker who will be with us in just a couple of moments. Things were different 24 hours ago for me. I was on Amelia Island in Florida. I had the occasion of doing something I've never done before. As Rhonda and I left our little condo on the island, for the first time ever, I took that long hook and lowered every one of the hurricane shutters, covering up every single window and door. And I had two feelings when I left. One of them was, after you do that, it's absolutely pitch dark inside, and there's this eerie sense that something may be happening that you've never experienced before. But then the other piece of that I was reminded of as I walked to the elevator was that no matter what happens to that piece of property in Florida, SunTrust and I may have some conversations, Pat, about the financing of it and when the next payment is due. And I may have a battle with an insurance company, but the reality is my life is just fine. We have another place to live. We have jobs. We have food and water, gasoline, and all those things that we need. And so no matter what happens to a piece of physical property, we're just fine. We know as we gather this morning that that is not the case for literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in our country and in nations along the Caribbean. And so this morning I just want to, instead of providing an advertisement about the latest, greatest things going on at Lipscomb, I just want you to invite you to be a part of something that we are doing as we seek to reach out to a community in many parts of the world. We immediately formed a hurricane relief committee about 10 days ago. The senior administrators on that committee meet every single morning. And we have tried to say, what does a university in Nashville, Tennessee do that is so far removed physically from what's going on, but not completely removed in terms of the people who are involved? We quickly identified the students at this campus who are from the affected areas, and we will do that again today as it relates to Florida. We began to look at where our alumni were and that network of hundreds and hundreds of people that live in those places and we're sure are responding, but also in some cases in great need. We put up one of those fundraising moments where you just stick it out there and say, if anybody would like to help us, here is the herd for the hurricane victims. Here's our relief effort. We thought we might motivate students to give a couple $1,000 and didn't know what we'd do with that. I checked a few moments ago and it's something over 41,000 at this point. And even though faculty and staff don't get paid all that well, and even though students have other bills and concerns financially, it's wonderful to see their particular generosity. And so we will continue, not just in a week or two, but we've made the commitment to continue for months into the future because we know the moment happens and then attention gets dissipated very, very quickly, and yet the lives that have been affected will be affected for months and years into the future. So more than 200 Lipscomb faculty and staff and students have already made a commitment to sometime in the next 6 months from now through spring break actually travel to some of those affected areas and in a coordinated effort serve as we find that service can be most useful. And obviously, we have no idea where this is going. We have seen the horror of what happened in Texas, but we are seeing what's happening in the Caribbean. Florida is about to happen, and following that are 2 more storms in the Atlantic. While all this is going on, there are floods in Pakistan and India that are multiples of what we've experienced in terms of death and displacement. There are the largest fires in Southern California that have ever occurred there, and they don't even make CNN this week because of all of this. So all I want to do today is to have taken this minute or two to encourage you to respond however you feel there is an appropriate response. If you choose to participate with this university, you will be helping young people who have lived in this town before, perhaps taught in our schools, interned at your businesses, and are back in their home states. You'll be helping families that have students who are here now and wrestling with their own situation while trying to keep their family on its agenda. And the one thing I can guarantee you about our very, very small little relief fund is that 100% of every single dollar will go to the people who need it and not be taken up by overhead that's needed by a nonprofit organization. So let me just read this statement that I got from an alum yesterday. He graduated in the year 2000. I had sent out a note to these folks, and he's writing back saying, I graduated in the class of 2000 from Lipscomb. We live in League City, Texas. Our area was especially hard hit during Harvey. We're members of the League City Church. Our building has been set up as a distribution center. We're serving thousands and thousands and thousands of meals. But then there was one sentence that caught my attention. He said, there are many places needing assistance right now, but if you all are looking for a place to help, the League City and our team would absolutely put anything you provide to good use. I was amazed at the humility of that, and yet the sincerity of that particular request, and he ends his email to me by saying, the damage in our area is real and heartbreaking for many people. It was nice to read your email and to hear the Lipscomb family is concerned and stepping up in a time of need. And then he concludes by saying, I would expect nothing less. So let's join together as a community, as you probably have done and will continue to be, and whether it's through something here or it's something in other areas of the country, may God allow us to be generous, and may God allow us to be Jesus, if you will, to those who need healing and assistance. I want to introduce two people this morning to you. One is the new director of our School of Music. We are so pleased that Lipscomb has a College of Entertainment and the Arts that has doubled in size in the last few months, a college that will move into a brand new $15 million facility in about 14 months, a college that now owns the Sound Emporium, one of the most historic recording studios in Nashville, and a school that is producing people and is being led by people. Frankly, we are two in the music business at Lipscomb. And so I'd just like to introduce to you the new head of our School of Music, who will be leading not only contemporary music, but all of our traditional music as well. We think there's a strong connection between those two for students. He is a 25-time Dove Award winner. He has won 14 Grammys in his career. At one point, there was a period of about 6 years, and 5 of those, he was the producer of the year. He's in the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. Would you welcome to the Lipscomb community his first business breakfast, Brown Bannister. And let me introduce just very briefly our speaker this morning. You have a bio in your program. I won't go through that. But Randy Goodman is also a Lipscomb graduate, and not someone who is struggling in this business, but someone who has been the leader in this business for 32 years. He's the CEO of Sony Music, which includes a number of imprints and labels. He has worked with virtually all the stars you would know in the country music world. Began 32 years ago. For a period of time was the head of Lyric Street Records. The thing about Randy that I think is most amazing, and I think you'll hear about it today, is he has been in one of the most disruptive industries in the country. An industry that, like so many of ours, has gone through the moments of tremendous disruption because of the changes in technology. And yet he has both weathered and understood and led in those changes, and 32 years later continues to work in that industry. We are pleased to count him as an alum of Lipscomb University. Would you please welcome Randy Goodman.
Well, it's good to be here. Walt Lever wouldn't leave me alone until I finally said, okay, I'll do this, Walt. Just quit calling me. And I know that some of y'all know about that, but it's always a pleasure to be here. And Brown, I want to say my personal congratulations to you. That's very exciting for you, and I know it's going to be a great step forward for Lipscomb and what they're doing in the music business. And the other thing I wanted to say in light of what Dr. Lowry just brought up about the storms, I mean, this is one of the things that's very gratifying about the music industry. At first I was thinking, wow, we're talking about life and death situations, and here I'm going to get up and talk about how our industry has been disruptive. Woe is me. But one of the things that's great about the business that we're all a part of is the fact that we have artists on our label. Miranda Lambert has a whole Mutt Nation program, and she's down, and she's from the Houston area, and she's been down there involved with helping to save the animals that are down there as well, along with the people. And she's also going to be playing a benefit concert down there with George Strait, as is Brad Paisley, as is so many of our other artists, and they're just putting all that together right now. And so it's one of the exciting things to be a part of this business as you help develop these new artists and involved with the legacy artists just to see the good work that they do. And having been in New York and having been in Nashville, I will tell you that it's something that's very unique to our industry and very unique to our community, that immediately there's a call to action. Sarah Trahern, a good friend who many of you know is the head of the CMA, immediately went into action and began to help pull all these together. And there's going to be a telethon that will cover all the networks coming up here shortly. So it's an exciting thing to be involved in it from that perspective. And I also just wanted to let you know there's some, Randy used, he kept talking about me. And one of the things that I've learned over the 32 years, maybe the first few years I thought it was about me, but I realize now it ain't about me at all. It's about the great team that you have around you. And at table 3 here, I have I'm fortunate to have some of my key staff here. So I'd love for y'all to come up and say hello to them after we get through today. So we're going to jump into this because Walt told me I have 10 minutes. I have no idea how I'm going to get through 40 years in 10 minutes, but I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to speak as quickly as I can. My topic, several people asked me, like, what does all of the above mean? And as I was being pressed by the Lipscomb powers that be to get my topic to them for their marketing information, I went back through the list of what others of you and other people have talked about, and I realized very quickly that unless you're maybe in commercial real estate or just real estate, we're all pretty much dealing with the same issues right now, and that is technology-driven market disruption, probably doing more with less, squeezed revenues with stable, probably more rising cost, competition for your customers' time due to a broadening array of content distribution, which, if you're like the music industry and you're in the content business, Dr. Lowry, you understand what that assault can mean. It means all of the above. So I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. I apologize beforehand, but if you've got any specific questions that I don't address, write them down and we'll deal with them in the Q&A. There are 3 main topics that I really want to address today. Number 1 is I want to share with you a broad overview of the recorded industry, noting the major periods of disruption. I think those are very important, and you'll get a real sense of what the impact has been. I want to talk a little bit about Sony Music Nashville, the overview, where we are today as a new team that's been in place over the last 2 years. And then Walt had asked me just to do a quick overview of some of the strategies that we've been employing over the last 2 years as we seek to rebuild the prominence and the legacy of Sony Music Nashville. So before I dive into this, I say the prominence and the legacy of Sony Music Nashville. What does that exactly mean? Well, the artists that are up here is a fractional, it's a sliver of what Sony Music Nashville really is. And Sony Music Nashville is an amalgam of what was the RCA label group, which then became BMG, which was Columbia and Epic, which became Sony, and then Sony and BMG, Japanese, Germans, merged. They didn't really get along. There was a culture clash, and Sony bought out BMG. And so Sony Music Nashville really began in 2006. If you're not a country music aficionado, going from left to right, one of the original outlaws, Waylon Jennings. Next to him is Keith Whitley, arguably one of the greatest country singers ever. Next to him is Kenny Rogers. You may not recognize him since he's had a facelift since that picture. There's Dolly, Kenny and Dolly, Islands in the Stream, Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, and then, of course, we've got Naomi and Winona Judd. But just a sliver of what it means to be a part of Sony Music Nashville. So let's dive into some of the actual look that what I want to get into today. And this is indeed, yes, a 40-year look at what's been going on in the pre-recorded business. Now, let me say, for purposes of this presentation, this is the entire industry. This just isn't country, but we're going to take a drill down into country. This comes from the RIAA, which is the Recording Industry Association of America. That's our trade organization, and that's who we work closely with for this kind of information. So what you're seeing left to right is from 1973 all the way up to the very end, which is this past year of 2016. And you've got some color codes. The kind of aquafoam green, I guess, is vinyl. The blue, lighter blue, is cassette. which then moves left to right into the darker blue, which is CD. And then you'll see the kind of mauve purple is digital, and then the pink, different gradations of pink, is the new streaming world. But what you're seeing here is in the early days, 1978, we had a nice little peak. We got to 15 billion as a total industry, and then there was a 5-year decline, and it took about 14 years to recover, and that was because of the configuration. The CD came into such prominence, and it overtook everything, and that's what drove the business. It drove the business to a new height, which was $20 billion plus, until this bad little thing came along called Napster in 1999, and you can see what happened when piracy became rampant and when Napster took hold. There has been a 16-year decline in the overall music industry, which was halted last year. So the first time in 16 years, the overall music industry saw an uptick, and it was primarily driven by streaming, which we'll talk about that in a minute. And as you can see up there, you see the TBD in terms of the years to recovery. So we've got still a long ways to go to even build back up to where we were. We note Napster, we note YouTube, because those are the two probably most disruptive technologies which kind of led the way in terms of where we were going next. This next slide is basically a drill down, if you will, of the last 5 years, just to really give you a greater sense, a clearer sense of what's been going on, excuse me, with the different configurations within the music industry. So again, left to right, you've got 2011, but that also notes where Spotify came into play, and most of you know about Spotify as a streaming service. But you can see over the period of time, at that year, streaming was 14%, and has run into 2016 at 55%, the rapid growth of streaming. You're also seeing what's been happening with the digital purchases, which is primarily iTunes, almost going in half, and again, the CD going from 44% down to 15% in those 6 years there. And then you can see vinyl. People talk a lot about vinyl. That gets a lot of press because it's cool, and it has a lot to do more with collectors, but you can see that it's really kind of a nominal part of our overall business. So what you're seeing here is the traditional delivery systems, the traditional configurations continue to decline, and streaming continues to take over. Now, recently, a Goldman Sachs analyst, Lisa Yang, who follows our business and was writing in the Global Recorded Music Industry Journal, speculated that by the year 2030, we should see global business back up over 40 billion, which adjusted for the US would take us back to that 20 billion. So the years to recover, you would see, would run from really 1999 to 2030. That's a long, long period of time. And by the time we do recover and streaming does become 82% of the revenue, I may be an adjunct professor here at Lipscomb, if not dead. However, that's kind of a prognostication about where we're going. And it all points to the fact that streaming is definitely the new configuration. And when I say configuration, think CD, think cassette, think vinyl. It's the way that the music is delivered. And you hear a lot about streaming, and most of you are sitting there saying, okay, great. The industry has turned around, that's exceptional, but we're living here in Nashville, Tennessee. So what does it really mean from a country genre perspective? This is an interesting chart because it shows from left to right. You've got the total industry down in the boxes below. You got the total industry, which is, again, everything: rock, pop, hip hop, soundtracks, everything that's not specifically country music. You've got that on the left-hand side. And if you look across the top, what you're seeing here as a percentage of total industry, you're seeing that country music across everything is about a 10% part of the overall industry. And that historically has been true. At the very minimum, we've been 10%, and we grow as much as 15%. You start drilling down and you see next under total volume, you see overall albums, and you go across and country music is 13%. We're out indexing. And further down with physical albums, we're still out indexing the rest of the market in physical albums and also digital albums. You move below all that and you get to on-demand streaming, and that's where our problem really is, and that's what we're struggling with. You see on-demand streaming in the billions over the left-hand box in terms of total industry, and you see what it is for country, and you look at the percentages. So whereas we've historically been at minimum a 10% part of the overall music industry pie, right now in audio we're at 6%, and video we're at 4%. And that's really, you could say that streaming kind of began 2005, but per the last slide, let's just say it was Spotify in 2011. And so you're looking at an overall industry that has grown that rapidly in streaming, and you're seeing how far behind country music is. Now, Sarah will tell you with the research that we do at CMA, and we all know this, but historically country music always lags behind in terms of technology adoption. But it always catches up because you kind of know what to do with a cassette, you know what to do with an 8-track, you know what to do with the CD. Now all of a sudden, our core demographic, which we call the soccer moms, for lack of a better term, is sitting there going, should I be on Spotify? Should I be on Apple? Should I be on Apple Streaming? Should I be on Amazon Prime? Should I be on Pandora? And how do I get on it? And should I do pay? And should I do free? And so we're living in a world now where it's intuitive for the younger demographic to do that. All of y'all who have kids or grandkids or whatever else, you know how intuitive that is for them. For our demographic, it's not as intuitive, and it's one of the things that we're really having to struggle with and deal with as an industry, because the most important thing for us over the next several years is to get our streaming to scale, at least to a 10% business. Until we do, that technology disruption and that squeeze on our revenues are going to continue to be a primary source of the struggles that we have. So how is Sony Music Nashville faring in this whole thing? As I said, this new team, myself, I came back to Sony because I had started at RCA, which now is all a part of Sony, 2 years ago, and our new team came together. And because we are still primarily driven by terrestrial radio, it takes time for that kind of airplay to drive market share changes. And so we just wanted to take a real quick look at where our market share was 2 years ago and where it is today. And what you're seeing is that Sony Music Nashville, we're up. We're up 0.8%. We're almost up a percentage point, which is good. We're growing. It's not going the other way. The good news is that we're outpacing some of our colleagues. Warner Brothers Nashville, you see, is down almost 2% in this period of time. Our ultimate nemesis, Universal Music, which is the largest in the world and who we have aspirations to overtake at some point, God willing, before 2030, is started at 25% and is down to 23%. And Big Machine, which is the largest independent label group in Nashville, has grown 11.6%. So again, the growth is tepid in the market share. The good thing for us is that we've made more of an impact than anybody else has in the last 2 years, but we've got a lot of growth relative to that. As I said earlier, it was July 13, 2015, when myself, Ken Robold, who's our EVP COO, Steve Hodges, who's our EVP of promotion, and Jim Catino, who's our Senior Vice President of A&R, when we all kind of came together as the executive team, as the new team 2 years ago for Sony Music Nashville. And since we added John Zarling, who came over from Big Machine as our EVP of Marketing and New Businesses. And between those 5 guys, we've got 125 years of youthful experience in the business. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to pivot and talk about some of the strategies that we've been employing over the last 2 years in light of the context that I just set for you. So number one of the things that we've had to accept, and a lot of you have had to accept, that the marketplace just is what it is. So let's get on with it and deal with it. Disruption is, Napster is, Apple came along, Spotify came along, and now streaming is our new configuration. This is the new world order. We either adopt or we die. And so to ensure that we have a strong footing for our adoption, we've created a real value-based process which drives our objective-based ad hoc team approach. And that's something I can talk to you about a little bit later if you've got the inclination to do so. But underlying all that is something that we talk about all the time, and that is Let's do the right thing. What is the right thing? We have robust dialogue every day about what that right thing is as it relates to our artists and to their products and to Sony Music Nashville as well. One of the things that we wanted to undergird ourselves with was a set of values that we could go back to on a daily basis and use that as a lens for what we're doing. Passion, creativity, dependability, growth, and respect. And these are the things that we charge ourselves with on a daily basis. One of the things that we've done in a very strategic kind of way, particularly this year, in understanding how important streaming is going to become and how we haven't scaled yet, we talk constantly about how we're going to lean into streaming. And it's something that we really drive back to our teams, again, on a daily basis to talk about what are some of the programs, what are some of the strategies that we can employ that really allow us to lean into streaming. The fact that we're at Lipscomb notwithstanding, in our world, hope is not a strategy. Anytime anybody brings that up in a meeting, we always look at each other and go, we need a plan, we need a strategy. We will hope once we put that plan in place that it works. But again, we're in a world it is a world that's a tough place to be. And so therefore we have to be more strategic than hopeful. We can't just be waiting around, and therefore our lean into strategy. Our second thing is really a focus on new artists and artist development. And that's not to say that we don't spend a great deal of time and energy on the Miranda Lamberts and the Kenny Chesneys and the Tim McGraws and the Faith Hills and the Brad Paisleys and the Dollies and the Chris Youngs, because these are these superstar artists that are driving our business plan on a year in and year out basis. But also they're very important for us to help bridge the gap for us to move into a streaming world and to allow us to bring the new artists along. One of the things that our A&R staff, we charge them with, and we all charge ourselves with, and every time we look at a new artist, we talk about are they unique and are they compelling? Because if they're not unique, if they don't have their own lane, we don't need to get into that business. And if we aren't compelled by them, we doubt that anybody else is. So the real primary strategic, I guess, roster charge for us, our creative charge, has been in the new artist. And so how have we done in this past 2 years? Again, I tell this story all the time. I was in 3 days in the new job. Jim Catino walked in, he goes, "Man, I know it's crazy and you're drinking out of a fire hose." He said, but you got to hear this. Taylor and I really want you to hear this new artist. We've been trying to get in business with her, and we just couldn't get any traction. I said, well, let's sit down and play it. And it happened to be a young woman by the name of Maren Morris, who went on to win the Best New Artist at the CMA and the Best New Artist at the ACM, and won a Grammy in her first year. And we had a gold album, and you can see up there, this is kind of a listing of the new artists that we've introduced along with some of our competitors' new artists this past year. And it's something that I'm extremely proud of for Sony Music Nashville and for our team. But if you look top to bottom, if you see the little swoosh there, I have no idea what that means, but that's what Japan tells us we're supposed to use, and that represents Sony. But that little swoosh designates our artists. And so you've got Kane Brown. We released him last December. His first week was almost 51,000 units. That was the largest debut by a new artist since Sam Hunt. I think you guys know who Sam Hunt is, so I think that puts that into perspective. Maren Morris came in June of 16. We debuted with close to 45. Cam, a new artist that we worked as we got here, 44. Luke Combs, who right now has the #1 album in the country at 43. And then you see where we debuted Old Dominion, which was the first new artist that we put out when we got here. All that to say is that this team is doing a tremendous job of finding the right new talent, setting them up, and driving in the marketplace. And it's something that I'm really proud of, because more than market share, this is real near term what's going on. This is us getting into the marketplace and being active, and market share will come after that. And lastly, probably the third thing that we talk a lot about, I was telling Dr. Lowry, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weekends ago about disruption, and they were talking about how too much is made about disruption and that you really need to stick to your core strengths. The funny thing was, they said too much is made about disruption, but the two industries that they decided that were the most disrupted happened to be our business and then also the taxi business with Uber and Lyft. But there is no doubt that, as I said, business is what it is, disruption is what it is. And so one of the things that we've really focused on is identifying what our core strengths are and really working towards that. As we look at our core strengths, we are still an industry that's driven by terrestrial radio. We're talking about streaming, so it sounds counterintuitive for me to talk about something as old and particularly maybe as arcane as terrestrial radio. But terrestrial radio, and I say that's SIX, that's SM, that's the radio stations that you turn to in your radio dial. That's really still what drives everything. It drives ticket sales, it drives consumption of albums, it also drives streaming. So that's a very important part of where our manpower is. What you see up there, though, it's really interesting of what this disruption has done to us as a local business as it relates to the economic development position here in Nashville. But you can see the head count of Sony under the swoosh 10 years ago. We were 97 people. Now we're 30 people less. And that doesn't mean that we have less to do. And in that period of time, we brought on whole new digital departments. We brought on whole new departments that are focused on new business and sponsorship. But it shows you that, once again, that disruptive nature is really requiring us to do more with less. Off to the right and in the Brown Bannister world is our Provident Label group, and that's our Christian group that we have oversight of. They were very heavily involved in distribution, and that's why they had 162 people, and they're down now to 86. And that's an incredible organization as well. And obviously, you didn't have time to dwell in on that, just really focusing more on Sony Music Nashville. But this is the way we break out our overhead and our manpower. Obviously, promotion, we have 3 different imprints. Basically means it gives us 3 different calendars with which to put records out into the marketplace. And you see where we're going. 10 years ago, we didn't have a digital marketing department. And 10 years ago, the marketing department wasn't this large, and nor did we have someone like a John Zarling who's helping us look for additional and new revenue streams. But that kind of gives you a sense of where we are and where our focus is. And that's one of the things that we've really stressed, even in light of the disruption, is that it's really about signing and developing the right acts, and that's having a great A&R team, which I believe that we have. It's also about having a real value-driven team approach, and that's something that we've built in the last 2 years. And it's also about how do we distribute, get records to radio, get records out in our distribution network, and also being a part of Sony, it gives us a global reach and a global positioning. And I think those are real important differentiators for us when we're out talking to new artists who we hope will make Sony Music Nashville our home. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is timing is everything, right? So I said earlier, 2006 is when Sony Music Nashville first began as that unit. Well, this year we did something that's historic. And that's not the real Sasquatch. That's a reasonable facsimile of Sasquatch. And that picture with me, Kane Brown and Luke Combs. But if you look at the chart over there in Billboard, that's this week's chart. Old Dominion debuted at #1. Our Luke Combs, which had been at #1, dropped to #2. Our Kane Brown record had been at 6, jumped to #4. So for the first time in Sony Music Nashville's history, since we began in 2006, we had 3 of the top 4 albums in the Billboard consumption chart. And we had a little bit of a toast and celebration on Tuesday when we all got back in from the holiday. So it's an exciting moment for us at Sony Music Nashville. It says that we are, as a team, are on the right track, that our strategies are indeed working, but no doubt we have a long way to go. And we've got to really work on Sasquatch's social media so we can get his streaming numbers up as well. So in as quickly as a time as I possibly could, I took you through 40 years and took you through the last 2 years and what our strategies have been. And hopefully you're seeing that I'm very confident about where we are. I have a great team. We are a great team. We believe in what we're doing and the artists that we're a part of. And this last slide is just really what Sony Music Nashville is right now as a roster. As I referred to earlier, we're broken into 3 different label imprints. The top is Arista, and you see the artists across the board. Below that is the Columbia imprint, and below that is the RCA imprint. And then we thought it would be interesting below that to put some faces and some names that you've never heard of, and these are a lot of the new and developing artists that are in the queue. So I don't know how long that took me, Emily. How long was that? 25 minutes. So I'm way over. So let's get up here and let's get into some Q&A. So thank you. That was a lot. Excellent. That was like speed dating, I guess.
All right, Randy, welcome home.
Thank you.
Let me remind the audience, you can send questions in, instructions on the program. Kate and I will not use any question that begins with the words, Randy, can you get me tickets to a concert? However, you and I can talk about the Jimmy Buffett concert after this is
He's
over.
a universal artist.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry. Hey, I was really fascinated as I read up on this today. I anticipated your comments about streaming. I mean, that's pretty clear. But what really amazed me was the role of things like big data and artificial intelligence and what's really driving, this whole streaming thing. It's more than just an alternative delivery method.
Right.
So talk a little bit about big data and that sort of thing.
Well, when you talk about artificial intelligence and what's going on, Ken and I were just up at, we did a road trip last week to visit our streaming accounts, our streaming partners. So we were in Los Angeles to visit with Spotify and Apple, and then we flew up to Seattle to visit with Amazon. And I don't know, how many of y'all have an Alexa or an Echo at home? Yeah, I mean, if you're like me, I'm always making the joke. I get home and we have the Amazon warehouse has been relocated to our front porch. It's amazing. I don't even know what all this stuff is, but that's a new technology that Amazon's using that we really believe could have a big impact. Again, as that scales, that could have a big impact for us in terms of sales. One of the things that Amazon is unique with is so much of our core demographic already sits in the Amazon Prime category, like my wife and my daughter. And with that artificial intelligence, you're able to say, order me whatever it is, and it's going to come there. And they've just recently moved into their own streaming service, so you can actually talk to Alexa and say, play me a Jimmy Buffett playlist, if you will. And so we're very encouraged by that, and I think our global business is very encouraged by that, because that's just another way that I think we're going to be able to penetrate that market and make it even easier so that there's not as many decisions that need to be made for our core demographic. They just call up a playlist, or they just call up Miranda Lambert, and it's going to come through that Amazon stream. I think that's going to continue to be a big part of that. But like everything, like us having to scale with streaming, that's something that's going to have to scale for them for it to really make an impact.
Just like to remind everybody that you can text your questions if you have one for Randy this morning. Can you further that a little bit and just talk about the economics of that, the royalties, how that all plays, just a little bit more detail on that?
You know what? This is why I brought this room, this table of very smart guys. The smarter guys are sitting down there. Ken Robold, who's our COO and really oversees a lot of that. Ken, you want to take that one?
Sure.
We need this vocal mic on table 3 on, please.
There we go. So a stream.
Why don't you stand up, Ken, so everybody sees who you are?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Randy. No, a stream. The economics, they vary. With Spotify, there are ad-supported streams which garner very, very little revenue, somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.2 cents per stream. Apple, who obviously is paid, and Amazon, who are paid, we get very, very much more revenue. But you're still talking micro pennies. On an average Apple stream, we get about 0.7 pennies per stream, and similar with Amazon. So we are really trying as an industry to get that ad-supported revenue to paid only. And when you start quantifying those streams, as you can see, you go from, people are used to spending on a digital album $9.99 or $7.99. It used to be $12.99. To really quantify those streams into those micro pennies, it takes millions and millions and millions of streams. So to Randy's point about us scaling, we still have a long, long way to go. And with accounts like Amazon, who are growing at a very rapid pace, it gives us hope for the future. But that's pretty much the ad supported. And then you get to YouTube, and those are, as Randy mentioned earlier, with YouTube is about the same as the ad supported, if not less than. So you're talking about 0.15 pennies per stream. So you can imagine with that math how quickly those need to add up and how much scale we need to get to equate to those revenues that Randy referenced.
And further to that, in the consumption chart that I showed you at the very end there, they include things called TEAs, which are track equivalents. So they aggregate up 10 tracks from digital download, and that becomes what an album would be if it's from the same artist. And then you've got SEAs, which are stream equivalents, and that's about 1,500. So it takes 1,500 streams, to put it in perspective, to equal one album that's consumed. And so that kind of puts that into perspective in a unit versus revenue.
Yeah, I'm kind of amazed at how the streaming services that we subscribe to can suggest artists I've never heard about because I happen to like a particular type of music or a particular song. So we're trying to marry entrepreneurship and music here, and I'm just wondering, how important that is for the future of the music industry. Is it possible to be a pretty talented person but have really great entrepreneurial skills and sort of make your own way in the industry?
Yes, you can, and I think that the alternative world in particular does a lot of that. I mean, there are acts that my daughter will tell me about that I've never heard of before, and they're not getting our classic terrestrial radio airplay, but they're selling out at the Ryman Auditorium, which is 2,500 seats. And so they're doing it in a very non-traditional way. We're beginning to see it from an A&R perspective. We're seeing a shift because historically in Nashville, most country music labels did all the development on their own. But now what's happening is a Luke Combs, a Kane Brown, for example, are two artists that really began to build their own social media presence on their own. Luke Combs went out and started putting out his own EP, got an agency, started touring. And so we began to hear about both of them, our A&R team and our promotion team, back from what they were doing in the marketplace. And so we went to the small independent labels that they were involved in and did joint ventures with them so that we could acquire Kane and Luke and turbocharge them into the larger format. And so we're seeing that everywhere. And I think that it's interesting. I don't think it's insignificant that Luke and Kane are probably two of the more entrepreneurial, driven, DIY kind of guys that we have on our roster right now. And you see the success that we're having because they're constantly feeding that fan base and they understand what that fan base wants.
Do you see a lot of your competition going after those same types of artists? And then if
yes.
So what's your pitch that's different than theirs?
Well, as I said, one of the big differentiators that we've pitched early on, the pitch to Marin was because Sony Music Nashville hadn't had that kind of success with new artists, and we knew that had to be the story that we had to change. Was we had to come online and be quick to breaking some new artists. And so with Marin, it was very much about being a part of the Columbia legacy. That was something that she felt a connection with, but it was a part of our new team sitting down with her and her manager and being able to articulate for her a vision of what we felt like we could do and what the global Sony Music team could do. And thank goodness she bought into that, and then we were able to execute on that plan and deliver that to her, and she's found tremendous success. Now with that success and with the success of Old Dominion and with Cam, then that allows us, when we're sitting down with Kane and with Luke, that allows us to have that conversation from a successful perspective, which obviously means everything. But no doubt you saw 4 key players up there, and if you added all those numbers up, there's still a lot out there that's being gobbled up now by a lot of these independents. And so anything that's getting any heat and that our A&R department's aware of, all three of those other ones are there. And so another thing that has really, I guess, been tough for us just from an expense perspective is that even though revenues are down and you saw we're still in a decline, we're having to be very aggressive with the deals that we're making to make sure that we get the acts that we want.
Wow, time is flying by here, so we've probably got time for just a couple more questions. Kate, I'll ask one, and then you ask the last question, if that's okay. So I moderated a panel yesterday, and Ralph Schultz was on the panel, and he gave you a lot of credit, unbeknownst to you, for the role you played in making Nashville the it city and creating this incredible music scene we've got going on with Bridgestone and Ryman and Ascend and all the other venues. So talk a little bit about that and your role in that, and talk about, is it any possible for Nashville to get any hotter from a music perspective?
Well, I mean, as it relates to me being a part of making Nashville the it city, I think that's a huge and gross overstatement. But what he's referring to between Lyric Street, Disney, when I left there and came back to Sony, I had a nice sabbatical, and during that period of time, Mayor Dean asked me if I would co-chair this idea that he had for a music council. And so we brought in Butch and Ralph as kind of the core members of that team, and really brought in a high level of people that were touching the entertainment business, but maybe were not planted particularly in it. Like Colin Reed sat on that because obviously he has a destination attraction. So part of that was bringing that group together under the leadership of Mayor Dean and all the stuff that he was doing at that time. And we brought on some outside publicists and some marketing people to really help to tout that. So I had a very small part in that, and it was an incredible opportunity to see firsthand what was going on with Metro government, and to be riding alongside Mayor Dean when the new convention center was opened and the Hall of Fame was doubled in size. But yeah, what's been really exciting about Nashville is it's still very, very rooted in country music, but it's got everything now. Jack White moved from Detroit here, moved his headquarters here, and you've got the Black Keys that moved here. You've got Q Prime, one of the larger management companies that do a lot of rock and global things, have a base here in Nashville. Red Light Management, which is the largest management company in the world, has a huge footprint here in Nashville now. The Kings of Leon, who are on our RCA label, Kesha on the RCA label, they're from Nashville and live here. And so I think a lot of it is, as artists tend to get a little bit older, maybe move into more of a sobriety part of their career and start to have kids, they decide that Nashville's a better place for them than Los Angeles and New York. And quite honestly, Nashville's really one of the only places where you can come and there's still studios that do organic music, where there's real players and not people just doing tracks on a computer. And so I think people move here because of the great songwriting community and just because of the organic and authentic nature of the music that comes out of here, whether it's rock, pop, hip hop, or country.
Cool.
Well, thank you for all that you do for Nashville and that the music industry does for Nashville. I know there's a lot that you all contribute to. So we want you to be successful here. What next?
Well, if you want us to be successful, if you're on a free tier with one of the streaming services, please get off that and get on the premium. That would help us as we lean into streaming. So you guys can go back and tell the teams, Randy actually said at the business breakfast, get into paid, and it looks like all of you can probably afford that. So please do that. Don't use YouTube, and tell your kids not to use YouTube because it's 0.002 cents a stream, and it's just not a good service. But anyway, for us, I think we know what we have to do, and we've got a great team to do that. Universal, Warner Brothers, all of our competitors, Big Machine, we're all in the same boat. We all know what we need to do. I would say that one thing that we have going for us that no other genre of music has going for it is the CMA. I've been involved in the CMA for a long time, spent my time as the chairman of the board for that organization. But to have an organization like the Country Music Association, to have somebody now finally in that role like Sarah, who has taken it to a whole different level, really brings us together. We all, as we say, check our guns at the table and walk in and try to do the right thing for the business and the community. And having been in New York for 5 years in that world, that just does not happen. And so to have that kind of organization that leads the way for us to have that kind of dialogue, that kind of real robust dialogue, we share information. A part of our account trips that we did this past week, we had kind of an amalgam of CMA streaming information and our own streaming information, and it was very impactful when we were sitting down with our streaming partners. But the big thing for us is we've got to really figure out ways to help our core demographic. We've got to help educate them on what this new streaming is. The good news is it still is based on great music, and you can see from the chart from the new artists that we've been able to introduce, we still believe that, and our core strengths will help us win the day. We just got to be smart until it completely scales.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Randy, for your leadership in Nashville. Thank you for all the work that you and your team do to bless people with the gift of music across the world. That's very, very significant. This morning, as we leave here and as we think about our friends across the southern United States that are in the wake of one storm and in the path of several others, perhaps as we think about how it is that we be a good neighbor, we turn our attention to the one who taught us so much about being a good neighbor. Mr. Rogers started in the 1960s. He didn't start out to be a good TV star. He really just started out saying, I want to be a good neighbor to children. Frustrated by the fact that as television emerged, there was not good programming for children, he took it upon himself as a Presbyterian minister to launch a television show that became the longest running television show on public television. Mr. Rogers was once asked, what do you tell people in the face of catastrophe and in the face of tragedy? And the story he told was a story about his mother. And he said, my mother told me that when you find yourself in this moment where things have happened that are just beyond what you can imagine, that it's really important that you look for the helpers. That you make sure that you tell stories about the people that are helping those that are impacted, that are helping the victims, that are providing the rescue that is necessary. And he asked her why, and she said, because it's in the helpers that you see hope. And hope is restored in those communities and those people by the folks who come to help them. Hope comes through the helpers. And so as we think about being a good neighbor, not only in the coming weeks, but in the coming months to our friends that will be impacted, perhaps it is incumbent upon us to look for the helpers, but to also be the helpers. So that, yes, we can provide for the immediate needs that people have. We can provide the resources that will be scarce. We can help to do the rebuilding. But more significantly than that, we can help infuse hope in the people and the communities that will be impacted by the storms. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you at the next business breakfast. Have a great rest of your day.